Hello everybody, I'm continuing my Rolling Stones reviews with their Satanic Majesties Request. So this was their 6th studio album in the UK and 8th studio album in the United States. And this was the first album not to be reconfigured for the American market. This is the first time where a Stones album had been released in America exactly the same as it was in the UK. So yeah, track listing's the same, and every album released from here on is exactly the same between both the UK and US release. So after this, they stopped changing the track listings for the American market, which is good because it gets a bit confusing when you're looking at the early albums. But yeah, luckily they don't do it anymore after this. So this was released in December 1967, and this is one of the most pulverizing and controversial albums in the Stones catalogue. Like, this was the only time the Rolling Stones ever fully immersed themselves with psychedelia. Although the previous two albums, Aftermath and Between the Buttons, had hints of psychedelia on them. This is a full-on psychedelic album, and it's something that the Stones never really did anymore after this. Because this album was pretty poorly received by fans and critics. Like, the Stones were accused of trying to rip off the Beatles. You see the cover there; it looks pretty similar to Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And if you look really close, you can actually see the faces of the Beatles. I know if I had this on vinyl, you'd be able to probably see it a lot better. But this is actually something I strongly disagree with. Although, yeah, the cover looks similar to the Sgt. Pepper cover, but I don't agree that this is a rip-off of Sgt. Pepper's. Because this album, it sounds nothing like Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. This is a lot darker. And it doesn't really sound like anything that the Beatles would have done. Like, I think this album has its own identity, and I'm going to say this, I have talked about this album before. I did a list of albums that a lot of people don't like that I really love. This was included. I absolutely love this album. And this was one of the albums that actually got me into the Rolling Stones, so it's actually one of my favourite Stones albums. I know that's a hot take, but I think, but for me only, I think this is a top 5 Stones album. I love that cover there. I love the artwork, and I just love the sound on this album. So we can go through the track listing. So it starts off with Sing This All Together, which I absolutely love. It's a great psychedelic track, some great piano, and some great, I think there's bongos on here. So yeah, I think it's such a good way to open the album. A lot of people don't like this track, but I've always loved it. And we get Citadel, which is a great psychedelic rocker. It's got a great guitar riff, and it also uses the flute as well. So yeah, love this track. And then we get In Another Land, and this is the only song by the Rolling Stones to be sung by Bill Wyman. So he sings lead vocals on this one, and it's a very trippy song. It doesn't sound like the Rolling Stones. It actually sounds like a Pink Floyd song from the Syd Barrett era. It's very trippy. There's this tremolo effect on Bill's vocals. It's a use of a harpsichord, and there's also like sound effects on here, like wind blowing. Yeah, it's just such a trippy song, but I just love it. And we get 2000 Man, which, in my opinion, this is way better than Kiss. Kiss did a cover of this, but yeah, I think the less we talk about Kiss, the better. I've mentioned them a few times on my channel before, and so you probably know my dislike for them. But yeah, let's not talk about Kiss. But yeah, this is the original version, which is just way superior in my opinion. You know, it just starts off as a really like slow acoustic, and then it goes into an upbeat psychedelic rocker. And I love the use of the organ on here as well. And then we get to the only track on the album which I consider to be filler, is Sing This All Together, See What Happens, not to be confused with the opening track. This track's very it's very avant-garde. It's like the Beatles' Revolution 9 from the White Album, but this predates it by a year. I mean, it's got some interesting bits in it. You know, there are moments where you can actually hear the chorus from the opening track, and there's also some studio chatter, some backwards tape effects, some theremin effects, I think. But yeah, it goes on for about 8-10 minutes, I think. But yeah, it's got some interesting parts, but it is kind of a throwaway track, really. It didn't really need to be included on the album. It would have been good if they could have included it as like a bonus track, or you know, on a rarities compilation. But no, I don't think they should have included it on the actual album. Like, there were 2 singles released around this time, We Love You and Dandelion. I think it was a double A-side single that I think came from the same sessions as this album. I think they should have included them 2 songs on here instead of Sing This All Together, See What Happens. But yeah, that's the only track on the album that I would say is filler. Although it's got some interesting parts, like I said. But then we get to a classic Stones track, She's a Rainbow. Just a lovely track, lovely piano work, and it's got a lovely string arrangement from John Paul Jones, who of course would go on to be the bass player for Led Zeppelin. But yeah, it's a psychedelic classic, one of the best songs the Stones have ever done. And we get The Lantern, which is one of my favourite Rolling Stones songs. This is an underrated gem from the Stones. It's very it's kind of like a mixture of blues and psychedelia. You know, it's got this bluesy acoustic guitar, which is kind of giving you a hint of what would be on their next album, Beggar's Banquet. It kind of feels like a track that could have been on Beggar's Banquet, but yeah. So you've got the bluesy acoustic, and then you've got the psychedelic chorus, and there's also some brass. There's a brass section on here. I think it's a great track, and you've also got sound effects on here. Like, it opens with church bell sound effects. It's kind of haunting, but it's just a great track. And then we get Gompa, which this is kind of like their version of Within You, Without You. You know, the Beatles track from Sgt. Pepper. It has a use of I think it's bongo drums or congas, whatever. Yeah, it has like an African rhythm to it. And there's a flute solo on here as well. I think there's a sitar on here as well. But yeah, it's a great psychedelic track. A lot of people consider it a throwaway track, but I've always loved it. And it's got a distorted guitar on it as well. But yeah, just love this track. And we have another Stones classic, 2000 Light Years from Home. Fantastic. It's trippy. It's just an excellent psychedelic rocker with some great like theremin sound effects, and really, it's almost like a space rock song. You know, some very spacey, echoey sound effects on here. And then it ends with On With The Show, which I think is a really fun little track. It's kind of a humorous track. Mick Jagger actually sings in a British accent on here, so it's like, it's very Monty Python-esque, I think. But yeah, I love it. I think it's just great fun, and great way to close the album. It's basically a song about a cabaret, but yeah, I love it. It's fun. So yeah, I really love Satanic Majesty's Request. And it's an album that it took a long time for the Stones to make this album. Because during the recording sessions from this album, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards were arrested for possession of drugs. And they were actually in prison for about a month or so. So pretty much throughout 1967, they were in and out of the studio. So it took them a long time to actually get this album completed. But yeah, this album I think it deserves more love, in my opinion. I think this is an underrated work of art. So yeah, I'm going to rate this. I want to give it a 10 out of 10, but unfortunately it's Sing This All Together is the track that brings it down a notch, so I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10, but I still think it's a great album and hugely underappreciated. I think it deserves more love. Like, if you haven't heard it, go check it out. So I hope you enjoyed that review. My next review will be on Beggar's Banquet, so I'll see you then.